A
I think
lot's
I've already
happened.
started recording, but like, how are we? How are
A
you
lot's
feeling,
happened.
Carrie Twigg? We survived. Number one, we survived. That was an epic week. I mean, I would love just if you had to like do a Cliff Notes version of your week, how you would describe it. But it was a lot to process. I'm also reading and trying to consume as much as possible today on how, pundits, pollsters, strategists, Republicans, how everyone felt about it. But just at a personal level, how are you feeling?
On a personal level, I'm feeling really good. This was there was a lot of dissonance for me happening at the Chicago convention, in part because I was so curious about, this was also our first time getting to see Kamala as the nominee and what that all meant and what was happening. So part of my brain was like in process mode of just like,
Yeah,
how are they going to
sure.
pull this off? What's going to feel different? What's going to happen? So there's a bit of a mystery. Um, there was the experience that we talked about in one of the other episodes where like the energy was so great and the vibes were so high in the arena and you knew it looked amazing on television from the replays, but like the experience itself was really chaotic. Like logistically it was a pretty bad and poorly run convention logistically. And then um
Wait,
also like the
let's go deep on that for a second, because I think we've referenced it. But for those folks who were not there this week, can you maybe, I mean, I can also just offer a personal anecdote, which is, Parisa, who is literally like my heart and soul at the Second City. She's a chief operating officer. She brought her daughter. We got her passes. She arrived at 4 o'clock. The convention started at 6 o'clock, and she could not get a seat. I mean, it was so bad. I mean, I don't know what the logistical strategy was to overbook everything, because that's essentially what they decided to do, which was to give out way more tickets, perhaps, or way more credentials to ensure that the stadium was packed. But what it meant was, both personally, anecdotally, but also just reading reports, thousands of people were not allowed in. They like shut it down on the final night of the convention. So anyway, that's my personal anecdote.
but
But I know
even
you.
yeah but even in the nights leading up to, I mean, sort of at every turn, the first day when I was picking up our credentials, it took me 2 hours.
Yeah,
Like the second night of the convention, I stood in line for almost 2 hours, like 90 minutes. Like people were about to bum rush the gates. Like it was chaos. It was really
yeah,
unpleasant. People were waiting in line for Ubers for 3 hours after the convention was over. Like delegates got stuck on shuttles. Like, and listen, I know it's really hard to be a staffer at these things. No one wants it to be a disaster. No one's planning for it to be a disaster, but it was. And it's just
yeah,
like, it was really bad. And then, yeah, once you got into the arena, like most nights, I didn't get a seat. I
yeah.
mean, it
You're
was
in the arena,
really
but that
bad.
doesn't guarantee you anything, right? So
No,
it's
just like
essentially, it gives
thousands of
you,
people wandering in the halls.
yeah, it gives you, every pass has a color, and then every section of the arena from the floor all the way up to the very top is color coded. And so whatever color code you have, it's a free for all. So you just go and grab a seat, which means that, again, it's very stressful as well, because then when you get a seat, you don't want to lose a seat. And then I had also witnessed people getting in kind of fights because, there are people like, well, I want that seat. And someone's like, well, I'm saving a seat. And they're like,
Oh,
well,
yeah, I
I
saw
don't
that
care.
too.
Like, I don't care that you're saving a seat. Like, that seat is open. I traveled
Yeah,
here 3,000 miles. I've been waiting
yeah.
outside for 3.5 hours. I don't give a fuck if you're saving a seat. When your person comes back, they can take it back, but I'm sitting here,
They can
right?
sit
Like, there
on
was
my lap. Yeah.
a lot of that energy that was.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough. Um, and then also sort of the unfolding controversy of all the things that weren't being said, right? And who
Yeah,
got to be on the stage and who didn't, and the very real protests that were happening outside, the very kind of polite and considered requests on the behalf of Palestinian activists to be heard, to have be able to participate in the stage on the stage. The protests that were less polite and much more rugged, like it was, emotions were super, super high. And I think that experience of like, this is such a moving, beautiful, special thing to be a part of. And then it was such a disaster to get into. The whole, like, again, this is exciting. This is so great. This represents a profound opportunity that I feel very inherently and palpably as a woman of color, as like a person who cares about reproductive choice and all manner
Yeah.
of issues and the climate and all sorts of things, but also about, like what's happening in the world. So it's like I have friends who are literally protesting a genocide and protesting the very nature of the choices that we're making in our foreign policy, and then being like, okay, well, like I'll see you inside. And it was really tricky. It was really, so like I constantly felt pulled in a lot of different directions and like a lot of highs and a lot of lows. What about you?
Yeah, I felt the same. I mean, my biggest regret, I was not able to go see OCs into action, pop up or art activation. I wasn't able to go to a lot of events and panels and parties that I like really wanted to go to. The challenge with the week was there's just so much to do. There's so many people to
Logistically.
see, and it's overwhelming. Like they're like spreadsheets of like 100 or so different events and things that you can go to. Not to mention, Carrie, you and I also threw a big party, which took up a lot of my time, the planning and logistics of making sure that that went off without a hitch. Um,
And
and
nothing
so
goes according
proud.
to plan. You're like, okay, I'm gonna pop over here, and then I'm gonna swing by this, and then you like
Yeah,
run into someone, you get talking, or your Uber takes forever, whatever. It's like they're so hard to plan. There were a couple people who were coming for the first time who had texted me or emailed me the day before, and it's like, do you want to meet for coffee on Tuesday morning? I was like, sis, no.
there's no, yeah, I
Text
got a lot
me,
of that
yeah.
too, which was like, hey, let's just meet up. And I'm like, I don't know, unless you're going to the same thing I'm going to. We're probably not gonna see each other. But
Yeah. Drop a
um
pin, call a flyer.
drop a
Like
pin,
it's
totally.
rough.
I mean, I would say the highlights, lowlights for me, I guess there's like two tracks, right? I feel like I do think they got the credential stuff in, at least for us, in great order. So shouts to,
By day two.
yeah, shouts to the creators team. El Carada, who's an old friend who's kind of holding down the front on all that. They got all that shit together, which was great. Um, I think the busing, we benefited. Marina and I were staying at one of the fancier hotels because of um, Marina runs a National Democratic Redistricting Committee, so we were in the fancy hotel. So the busing, if you're in one of the fancy hotels, getting in and back and forth to the arena hall was pretty easy. That was like great. It was like for all of the RPs, or the people who weren't going to fancy hotels, it was impossible to get out of that arena hall. But for those who were in those sort of different routes, I thought that was really clean. And then on the actual programming side, my highlights, I don't know. I didn't even write them down, Twig, but I'm going to say, AOC for sure. I'm going to say a surprise Hillary Clinton. I'm just going to throw it out there. A surprise. I know. Look at your face. Look at your face. I was a Bernie supporter, but I thought her speech I thought her speech was great. And I thought it was a really great, speaking of the passing of the baton, I think you and I
Yeah.
were like, will Biden do that passing of the baton to Kamala? That didn't really happen,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And we could talk about Joe and my lowlights, but I think it happened with Hillary. I think Hillary really
Yeah, she
did
did.
pass the
She nailed it.
baton to Kamala, and she nailed it. I thought it was really, really beautiful. I thought Jasmine Crockett was incredible. I thought Mayor Pete was always so sharp, always spot on. The Obamas, the Obamas are like cleanup hitters. Like you could just
Yeah.
count on them to like raise the level of not just like oratory skill, but like really like making you be proud to be a Democrat, right? And I felt that when they spoke. And it was a very different vibe than the last night, which we'll get to. And then, of course, Tim Walz. He's my, I don't know. It's interesting. I've been reading all of the like breakdowns of whose favorite speeches, and Tim is my favorite speech. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I played high school football. Maybe it's because my favorite movie is Rudy. I don't know. But like, there's a lot of like Tim Walz, straight to your heart. Also Gus and his family, straight for the jugular. He sort of like captured, from my opinion, like what Democrats needed to embody was
Yeah.
Tim. And then, of course, Kamala. I mean, last but not least, you and I talked about this with Jose. We talked about this when we first got to Chicago, which is nothing else matters, really. There's like almost 100 some speeches, and none of them really matter. All of them are a prelude to, hopefully, fingers crossed, future President Kamala Harris. And she just nailed it. She absolutely, there's like nothing, there's no notes. I might have a few notes as with regards to the speechwriter and some like policy stuff that they chose to highlight. But as like what she brought to that stage and that history, crushed it, crushed it, crushed it. I was crying the whole time. I was so emotional. I thought, you know, I saw, randomly saw a friend, Kenny, who had worked for Kamala for many years and then worked for Tony. And it was like right before we went back to our seats because we were on the floor. And we gave each other a big hug, and we looked at each other. And I literally was like, "She's gonna crush it." And Kenny was like, "Oh, you know it, you know." We like gave each other a big hug, but it was like we just wanted her to crush it, Like it was like a very emotional vibes that came out because we're just so proud, and she fucking did it, man. It was great.
Yeah,
I'm
she
getting all
nailed it.
worked up, but it was
I know.
great.
All right, my basically every time I would ask someone who their favorites were, it was like setting aside the Obamas. Like that's just so self-evident as to not even be worth mentioning at this point.
It's almost like saying like Steph Curry. It's like, yeah, of course the
You know what I
Obamas are
mean?
gonna dominate. Yeah.
Creative choice, really
Yeah.
inspired choice.
Right.
I thought that so funny you said Hillary because I really loved Bernie.
Oh,
And I've not historically been his
look at
biggest
us.
cheerleader.
Twig,
We're
look at
growing.
us.
We're
We're
growing.
both growing. Look at us.
I did labor for so long. It's like I
Yeah.
obviously have always agreed with him like policy wise, but I've never particularly taken a shine to Bernie.
Yeah.
And so I was surprised at how moved I was by his speech. Moved might be a bit strong, but I was just like, I'm glad we're hearing that. That's something that's really important to have in this room. I
Agreed.
think the real people stories, like on Thursday night when they started doing the gun violence section and the mom from Uvalde, like it was devastating to listen to. I feel very conflicted about asking people to kind of lay bare their traumas in that way for an audience. I always feel really conflicted about that, whether it's in documentaries or in this type
Yeah.
of setting. And it was such a kind of devastating reminder of the stakes of why all of this matters, right? Like it's at its
Yes.
most concrete, most basic fundamental level, setting aside the macroeconomic reality, just like in a basic level, are we keeping our children safe?
Yes.
And or like doing everything we possibly can, and certain presidents will and certain presidents won't, and like that is just like fundamental. So that I basically started crying then on Thursday night and didn't stop for the remainder
Yeah.
of the night.
Same.
Bill Clinton, I was a little bit like, why with Bill Clinton? And yet Slick Willie still got it. Like he had some bangers, and I thought one of the things I thought he did really well was he set up an intellectual framework, as he's so good at doing, right? The
Yeah.
explainer in chief of it all. Like he set up a framework that can be repeated over and over and over again by voters in their everyday life, right? Like Donald Trump's about himself. Dude only talks about himself. The man is 100% focused on me. Like, you know,
Yep.
and he just laid out a really fascinating, or just like a really accessible and sort of user-friendly framework for how to think about these choices, while doing all the sort of emotion that we love and the kind of folksy, poking fun, self-deprecating that we love from Bill Clinton. Um, my guy, what is his name? You might have to look it up for me. My guy from West Virginia who spoke on Thursday night and told the union story about rednecks and the Black Hill miners revolt. He has a mullet, which I might have just been. I
Oh, the
love a mullet.
creator,
Yeah, I
the
might have just. I
content
just love a
creator.
mullet. His name is
Oh yeah.
John
Oh yeah.
Russell or
I'm blanking on
something.
his name as well.
I'm
He's a
following him now on
big
Instagram,
TikTok
and
star.
yeah, well,
Um,
I'm stalking him on the internet, and I can't remember his name, but he
he
was
played, yeah, and they played a
fantastic.
really beautiful video of him like going to Appalachia and all these like Union towns and like
Well, he's like a
the
West Virginia dude, like that
yeah
guy, he's my neighbor
yeah.
functionally, and, so I loved him, I loved seeing him up there, um, and then, of course, Kamala, she, you know, I'd sort of said that the thing that I was hoping for was the sort of that grand healer in chief, the grief, you know, the kind of emotionality from her, and I got it. I felt
Yeah.
very moved by her speech. I also have some things that I could pick apart about that speech. There were some like the transitions to the Donald Trump attack sections. I thought could have been had a little bit more finesse. I think the wild disparity in the reaction she got when she was sort of tripling down on support for Israel versus,
It's tough.
you know, validating the sanctity and dignity of Palestinian lives. Like the difference in the arena was so wild. It really spoke, I think, to how much they sort of bungled the politics there during the convention overall. And then Maya Harris, Kamala's sister,
So
absolute
good.
legend, like
So
came
good.
through, did so many of the big bio pieces that were extraordinary. She herself is brilliant and amazing. Um, and I think also set the stage for to then hear Kamala in the exact way we wanted to. So I thought those were all my favorites.
Maya was so good. I think the whole family. Nina was incredible. Tony the
Nina was
night
incredible.
before was
Yeah, the
incredible.
girls.
Oh yeah, Amara and Leela. I mean, like so beautiful. They taught not only the audience, but they taught America how to say Kamala, which was just
So
again, Maria and
cute.
I were just bawling. It was so beautiful.
I gotta
Um,
look up this dude's name because I feel so bad I didn't.
I can't remember his name, but no, I thought he was great. He also, I loved he came out, he's wearing like a flannel, you know what I mean? Like he's wearing like jeans and he was just
No.
himself out there. Um, how
Hot.
about lowlights? Not to spend too much time on lowlights. I think
John
we already,
Russell.
what was it?
His name is John Russell.
John Russell. John Russell, so dope, man.
Yeah, with that
So good.
mullet.
So,
Loved
so
it.
good. Um, what were some of your lowlights, Twig? And not, we don't need to be mean about it, but moments that
Yeah.
I mean,
I was pretty bummed by the president's speech. I was pretty bummed by Joe's speech.
yeah,
I thought it was too long. I thought it lacked poetry. I thought he had an opportunity to say something a little bit deeper and more profound. Like there were moments in it, but overall sitting there, it was tough to get through. I think if you take some of
agreed.
if you pull out a couple of the sentences, there were moving moments, but in mass watching it, I wasn't super thrilled by it. I was slightly disappointed, I would say. Um, I I was really, really happy that she didn't pick Josh Shapiro. Not that he was
Yeah, let's just
bad, but
talk for a
like
second.
the
Just
Obama cosplay thing.
so
Oh,
weird. It's
it's
so
weird.
weird. I didn't know because I've never heard. I've seen Governor Shapiro. I've seen Attorney General Shapiro on Zoom calls. I've met him a couple of times. Like he's always just very normal. He's like a normal dude.
Yeah.
there's something about the way he started speaking when he was in the like hunt for VP, where he just was mimicking Obama, right? Am I
Weird.
crazy?
No. No, people are talking about it. People are tweeting about it.
It's
It's
so
weird.
bizarre. It's
Yeah.
really, Josh, you don't need to do that, bro. You just don't need to do it. Like, just use your actual
Normal
voice.
voice. Yeah.
Just use your normal voice. Because you can, and like, by the way, we all aspire to speak like Barack Obama. And I think there's a lot you can learn from watching the game film. You know what I mean? Like watching him speak, but don't mimic him,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
it felt like LARPing or something. It was just like, my
Yeah, it
G,
was like
like, stop.
cosplay.
Yeah. It was weird.
It was so weird.
Um,
Anyway.
I wasn't, this was one of your top ones. I wasn't in love with Pete Buttigieg's speech.
Oh,
It was fine.
it was fine.
Low light might be strong, but like I was sort of like fine.
I always love watching Pete speak, and I thought it was a competent speech. I think the
Sure.
challenge with this speech, a lot of the attacks against Trump, we had heard 100 times by previous speakers. So
Yeah.
there
That's what
wasn't
I mean.
there wasn't like a lot that was new. I think that was another my sort of overall critique of this convention. And I'm sure every single member of Congress is going to hate me for saying this. There were just too many members of Congress that spoke. Just
Yeah.
too many. Just way too
Yeah.
many. You don't need
Yeah.
that many members of Congress to speak.
Yeah.
And I understand they all want to speak and they all want to be a part of this moment. But for these
History.
prime
Yeah.
time moments, right? Which is to say, from like when you're in the hall, from like I would say from 7 o'clock till the end of the night, let's just be a little bit more strategic about who we're putting on the stage. Because
Yeah.
every member, there was a slew of members, I think it might have been Wednesday night, where everyone was saying the same thing. it was like you could just like close your eyes and every single person is saying the same thing about Donald Trump. They're using
Yeah.
the same lines. It felt so canned. And I noticed that on Thursday night, they really tried to limit the amount of time that each member spoke, because on Monday night it was just a free for all, and
It went
people
till like
were
1 o'clock in the morning. It was
it
like,
was
what is
going so
happening?
late. But the other problem with that though too is when you then also condense everyone's remarks, so you have the same number of people, but you're just cutting them by so much, then you're not really getting anything either,
Yeah.
right? So you're just getting like hey, I'm this person from this place. Donald Trump's a criminal. Great, let's go get him. Like that was every
Right.
speech. So
Right.
yeah, like let's just maybe do a little bit better. I think my low light, maybe not low light, but let's this is a good segue maybe to Kamala's speech and just the overall strategy of what I would call Thursday night, which was
Yeah.
clearly Thursday night
Yeah.
was the night for America, which was like, this is when people are going to be watching, right?
Yeah.
And God bless Pluff and Cutter and Julie and everyone looked at the data, looked at, it's the exact opposite of what Donald Trump did, by the way. Let's be clear, right? Donald Trump's speech was a incoherent, rambling fucking disaster. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Carri said. But it was like a disaster. He was just giving his party what they wanted. He's grandiose. He's like talking about the assassination. He was just like, literally just like, it was like masturbatory. Kamala's speech and the entire night was so strategic, down to the point where I was counting up. I was like, I think virtually every person who spoke in prime time either was a veteran,
Oh,
or had served, or currently serving, sorry, or a law enforcement officer, or a prosecutor, right?
or some sort of defense, militaristic defense.
some
Panetta and all these
some
bros.
sort
Yeah.
of yeah. Panetta, Mark Kelly, that sheriff guy from, where is he from? I think he was from Arizona.
I
Anyway,
think it's
all this to
Michigan, babe.
say,
Michigan.
Michigan. Oh, Michigan.
He's
All this
from
to
Flint. He's
say,
the sheriff of Flint.
He's the sheriff of Flint. Incredible. He was great. I mean, he was like right out of Central Casting. Love that guy.
He really was. He
He
really
was so
was.
good.
He was
But
juiced.
they wanted to send a very strong signal to America that this is not your mom and dad's Democratic Party. This is not the woke left that you're reading about on Fox News, right? This is not, this is a new Democratic Party, and we're just as patriotic, and we like safe streets, and we like using lethal force, which is a term that was used by Kamala Harris. Like, it was so militaristic, and it was going after, in my opinion, it was going after independent voters, Republican voters who not that enthused by Donald Trump, who were like on the fence, you know, that 5% that was voting for RFK. And I think that the tactic was like, look, there's 6 or 7 states in play. We're going to go after every single one of those potential Republican voters. Now, when you make a choice like that, you come with a lot of assumptions about your base. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, I traditionally think that that final night is not for persuasion. That final night is for your base. That final night is the culmination of all of these parts, apparatus of the Democratic Party, as we discussed, Twig. Like, everyone is there, and it's like, you know, it's a pep rally, and we're all there under one roof. And, you know, it's a choice. I don't disagree. I mean, we'll see how it all bears out. I don't disagree with going for it like that, but we're already seeing sort of the backlash online. I think we're seeing the backlash on a lot of WhatsApp chains among young people that I'm seeing, where if you were a person under the age of 30 or 35, that last
You're like,
night
what was that?
was not for you. It was not
Yeah.
for you. That was not for
Yeah.
you. So anyway, sorry. I just
No, I agree.
monologued for a
I
minute.
agree. Which actually, it's like one of my highlights, which led into a low light. I was going to say the same thing, is that homeboy the congressman who's the hyper conservative,
Kinzinger.
Kinzinger. Like, I actually thought that was a highlight. I thought it was
Yeah,
important. It was amazing to have him there. And I think
agreed.
I think he deserved a little bit more play. Like, he probably should have been a little bit less surrounded by more traditional Democratic values. Because what he did was actually really courageous, you know, like, he's been kicked out of his
Agreed.
party. He's got friends that don't talk to him. He's lost a shit ton of donors. Like, him being so vocal has come at an extraordinary cost, and he's paid it. And I think that that's something that we should celebrate and be more laudatory of. I thought that, like, this super hawkish tone of the evening overall was really shocking in so many ways,
Yeah,
because it was quite militaristic. It was quite law enforcement heavy. We didn't do a ton to separate make a distinction around guns in any kind of meaningful way. So we have, you know, the mothers of children who have been killed by military weapons, right? Like assault rifles that are openly available to the public. And then we're also talking about making sure that America is the most lethal and heavily militarized country in the world. And that to me felt a little, again, dissonant. Like, the whole thing was just sort of dissonant. I would flag 2 things about how you framed it, though. One, I think that Thursday is the night that like is not the base's night. I
it's
do
not the
think
base
that
night. Yeah,
that's the night where you're going to get the audience. Anyone who was undecided was going to watch Thursday night. They weren't going to watch people that they can't vote for. They were only going to watch her. And so I think if you were going to make a play for the middle, that was your night, especially
yeah,
because it's so easy to sort of paint Kamala as a San Francisco liberal. I understand the pull towards the sort of broader kind of middle of the road stuff. And I think, you know, there might have been a happier marriage to be had. And then I would also say it's not even about it's not about your parents' Democratic Party. It's about, this isn't the party of 2020, right? Because don't forget, the Democratic Party of our parents was the 1994 Crim Bill. Like,
True.
like that was the Clinton era. That was the era of super predators. That was the era of mandatory
Third
minimums
way, and yeah,
and three
exactly.
strike rules and
Triangulation, and yeah, totally.
massive incarceration rates, and
So it is your
heavily
parents'
militarized.
Democratic Party.
It is. It absolutely is, right? Which
Yeah,
our generation of activists have been doing everything we can to dismantle.
I know. Well,
So,
that was the toughest part about it, which was,
yeah,
I think we've come so far, right? And I think we've come so far, and I think we've proven that, one, those policies don't work. They're not good policies. Two, um, they don't win. They're not good,
right.
the policy matches the politics of it. And trying to out Republicans is not a winning strategy. It just isn't.
Right. Right.
And I think that I understand why they did it, though. Here's the thing. Like, I understand, which
Sure.
is to say, Kamala, to your point, she's coming here with a lot of baggage and a lot of misinformation. And she has a certain level or a threshold that she has to, it's like you have to like reach a barrier. Like, I don't know what the Olympic term is. You have to like show that you can be
Threshold.
commander in
There's a
chief.
threshold. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
that you can be commander in chief. You can protect families. You can
Yeah.
protect the border, which is obviously, a challenge that she sort of got saddled with, as vice president. But I just felt like they just over torqued it a little too
Yeah.
much, maybe way too much.
Yeah. I think I think they made the point, and like we could
Yeah,
have eased up slightly at some point. It's like, yep, we get it. We get it. We get it. But again, there's an opportunity cost to all of this, right? And it's like they know we're voting for them. So maybe like I'm not prepared to say it was the wrong call because it's my preference, but I don't know that my preference is something that anyone cares about at this particular moment because I'm voting for Kamala Harris. You know what I mean?
well, that's a very good point, Sue. I think in the defense of this strategy, I think if we were in a room with Cutter and Pluff, and Cutter would just like make us so afraid because she's so good at that, they would point to the record number of donations, right? They would
Yeah.
point to literally like record number of donations. They would point to the record number of enthusiasm, people registering, young people are registering to vote, women are registering to vote.
Yeah.
John Delavote just posted this beautiful thing about like in battleground states like Michigan, there's a huge surge of women registering to vote since Kamala has taken the helm. So there's all this data to prove like, look, we're good with our base. Let's go after. And,
Yeah.
they're there for the taking. Let's be clear, right? I mean, I agree.
Absolutely.
We keep saying this, like there should be a white strategy. I don't think I envision this being the white strategy, though. Like, I don't know. Like,
It's one thing to say it; it's another thing to see it, right? Right in your face.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
Well, it reduces. I mean, maybe this is the white strategy, but in my head, the white strategy is different. In my head, white strategy is Mark Cuban. It's small business owners. It's like, how do we get jobs flowing into these states?
Yeah.
It's, how do we?
But I think that was like all the econ messaging,
Yeah,
like
that was like the night before, I think, right?
yeah.
It was not that night.
I do think they missed a really big opportunity, particularly if you're going to sort of shortchange young people's and young politically active kids' concerns around Gaza, that they really
Yeah,
missed an opportunity to do more around climate. Like they
agreed.
sort of shoehorned it into the beginning of Thursday night, which really obviously turned into the foreign policy night. And I understand that Kamala's going to be a foreign policy president. So I
Yeah,
understand that they really needed to show off that she had bona fides there. And yet, like, climate is a massive national security threat.
yes.
And they like totally missed an opportunity to frame it as such. if what we're trying to do is to get voters to join our tent to support her presidency, it's also about, I think, introducing them to a framework, a democratic framework for issues that they've been messaged to in really specific ways. And the fact is, when countries start running out of water, when they start running out of
Yes,
food, when they start, like, where do you think they're going to come? Like, where do you think they're going to
agreed.
go? Right. And it represents something that the DoD is extraordinarily concerned about. They're talking about kind of constantly. It's always in the Pentagon, like has a whole climate office, all of these things. And we don't, I think we missed an opportunity to at least give more credence to climate in a way that it's a top tier issue for young people. If you're not going to sort of meaningfully address the number one thing that they've asked you to address, which is Gaza, then at least you could do their number two issue. And I think that was a miss.
It was a huge miss. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think Maxwell Frost did a great job, but again, it was in that earlier hour, and he did not have a lot of time to speak, and there's a lot to do. But I agree with you, that idea of climate in terms of security would have been really powerful. Because like the Panetta, I mean, they had so many people
Yeah.
talking about the military
Yeah.
prowess that it was a little repetitive by the time we got to the end of the night. So that could have been great. But overall, I mean, look, Twig and I are saying all of these critiques
It was
honestly
great.
with love. And the other thing I'll say too is, we're looking at some of the polls. I think there's already seeming to be some bounces. We're just like keeping it real with regards to our eye on the ball of how do we win this fucking thing, and then also how do we keep this, up until Kamala Harris was our nominee, this very fractured left together. And
Yeah.
I guess that's sort of what I was getting at when I mean to say, because you bring up a good point. But, sporadic voters or people who may not vote for Democrats, they're going to tune in Thursday night. They're not going to watch any of these other nights. I guess when I made that critique of this should be the night where we're like really shoring up the base, I'm speaking specifically about young people and young people of color, right? That's what I'm
Oh, and
saying. Like,
that was not the message for sure.
and I don't think Thursday night they were even thinking about young people of color at all. And so, which
Young
leads
people,
us to
period, I would say.
young people, period.
Honestly,
Yeah.
young people, period.
Yeah. Thursday night was not a night for them. I think literally they should have just told all the influencers to like take a break, put them on the yacht, put them back on the yacht on Thursday night. In fact, there was real drama. Hassan Piker was given one of the sort of prime studio spaces overlooking the stage, and he was pulled out. I mean, there's a lot of drama now trying to figure out why Hassan's feed was cut. He was essentially like removed from the studio. They then took his credential and kind of escorted him out. He was, as we know, Hassan just tells it how it is. He's probably has been one of the loudest voices with regards to the tragedy unfolding in Gaza. And he was speaking very extemporaneously. And while he was doing it, he was with the New York Times reporter, which is the other crazy thing about this whole thing. Again, no shots or critiques or anything, or I guess this is a critique, but don't take offense to it. But
this is very worthy of if this really happened. I didn't see this, and I know you sent me the link. And I didn't watch it.
Well, one, inviting Hassan, I was very surprised that they invited in Hassan to begin with. You and I talked about this. I was like, wow, bold move, Cotton. Like, this is your biggest critic. But it's good. In my opinion, I'm like, you want to have him as an entry point to all of these kids who are skeptical of the Democratic Party. And the really great thing that Hassan does, and Jose did it with us as well, we can be very critical of the Democratic Party while at the same time showing how the Republican Party is not even a comparison, right? Like, we're not even on the same. I think Jose said, planetary ecosystem.
Totally. But even if he's not going to, even if he's like, I watched every day of the convention and my verdict is don't vote for this woman, he was going to do that anyway.
But he
So,
didn't
like,
say that. I mean, that's the thing. He never said don't vote for this woman.
I'm
He
just
was just
saying,
being
but
very
even if he
critical.
did,
Yeah, true.
like the idea that they would literally kick him out and strip him of his credentials is like is like the wackest thing. Like, what are you talking about? That is the exact opposite of everything that we're supposed to stand for.
Yeah, it was tough. And I have a feeling I've not spoken, clearly, I've not spoken to anyone who made this decision. I don't know if Hassan's gotten like more information. The other guidance that or people were saying was that what we were saying earlier, there were so many people so overpacked in the arena hall that credentialed press, like from CNN, MSNBC, and all these other places, were not getting access and not getting in. So they wanted to give Hassan's studio to someone else, which I think is like a bullshit argument. Like, you
Oh,
gave him that.
please.
He had already booked AOC, Bernie Sanders. So he had booked all of these speakers for the entire night, right? And then for whatever reason, they're like, look,
Please.
we're just going to take this whole thing away from you. I think it's so short sighted. And so that's the other part about this. I don't know who is running the influencer program, but like, talk to Twigg and I next time. Like, for real. Like, talk to people who have worked at the White House, who understand how this shit works, who understand, you know, the risk and reward. I agreed with the decision of having Hassan. To kick him out in that way for any reason is just bananas and bullshit. And, you know, again, I mean, I
And
don't think anyone
again,
needs to defend Hassan. Like, Hassan's a big boy. Like, he preferred it. Like, he
oh,
was
I'm
like, oh, this is great.
sure.
Like, I much rather do this from my hotel room. But just bad luck, man. Just bad luck. Like, don't be pushing this narrative. Don't try to get these Politico articles about how you're reaching out to influencers and all this stuff. And then also fuck up your shit with including reporters backstage that are accosting your talent. Like, oh my God. Such a mess. Such a mess. Anyway, sorry, now I'm going on a rant here, Twig, but it's a
All
bummer.
right. I'm actually gonna watch that video now because that's wild.
It's wild. It's a bummer. It's a bummer. All this to say, though, again, no convention is going to be perfect. No Democratic is going to be perfect. Democratic Party is going to be perfect. The
So there are some
highlights.
lessons we shouldn't have to learn.
Yes.
There should be some lessons that like are well-oiled machine, well taught by now.
Yeah, and there are so many. The highlights so far outweigh the lowlights, but the worry that I have, the vibe that I was getting from the Trump convention, this was before Kamala was announced. They were sort of feeling like they were going to win, right? There was this palpable
Oh
vibe of
yeah.
like, we're cruising to win.
Yeah.
And I will say this about this convention, I'm starting to feel a little bit of that too. Like, there was a version of that happening in Chicago as well. And the last night of the convention disproved that notion, to be candid. Like, the fact that Cutter and Plutt decided, no, on Thursday night, we're going to try to reach Republicans, right? I think from a programming perspective, we're still out to win this thing and we're still out to do this thing. But, you know, I think we all, as organizers, communications professionals, strategists, you know, we can't count on the youth vote and people of color, particularly men, especially now with the RFK Jr. Endorsement. This is going to be a lot closer than folks think, you know?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I am a little.
it definitely had that. We were both in 08. You weren't at the convention, but I was. But even that whole campaign, it had that feeling of like fait accompli, that it was
Yeah.
destined, that he was destined to win, that the fates were on your side, that it was an inevitable moment. And it definitely started to take on some of that. You know, it's hard not to get super high off the energy of the people that you're surrounded by, and it played so well on TV, and it was getting such great reviews, and everyone's texting each other all gassed up. But absolutely, I mean, this is going to be a dogfight in every battleground state for the next 75 days or 74 days.
So, did you watch any of the Republican reactions? I'll do a very quick Cliff Notes version because I was
No,
watching it today.
why would I watch Republican reactions when I know I'm going to get on the phone with you?
This is honestly what I give you. This is like my biggest. I give you curse words and I give you what Republicans are saying.
Both very fun and
Both
important.
very fun things. So I consumed a good amount of content this morning, like half asleep, and like the Ben Shapiro's, the Charlie Kirks, and they're. I mean, like I would say this. I think that they are genuinely petrified. Like there is like real anger. There's like, I wish we could show.
Delicious.
It's like delicious anger. I want to show this one clip of Shapiro like losing his mind. He now does this like late night thing, which is so funny. Like he's trying to be like a comedian. I don't know. I guess Crowder cratered or something. So Shapiro's now trying to be funny. But the he kept referring to joy. And I think that the reason why they're so scared about this is because it is very hard to beat back joy. Like
Yeah.
it is, and it's such a positive political word and emotion and strategy. And it's also, something that again, Kamala's reclaimed joy from their, bullshit critiques or their bullshit, I don't even know if you want to call it satire of her laugh or her just being herself. And so their attack now is this joy is like manufactured joy. And they're telling you to laugh and they're telling you to have this joy. And it just doesn't work. It just fundamentally, like I can tell he doesn't even believe what he's saying. Like it's really, really quite painful to watch these grown-ass men rail against joy. So, Kamala campaign, just keep ramping up the joy. Just keep doing it because there's no good retort. There's no good pushback against it. And then the other thing that was fascinating to me, a lot of attacks on the Obamas, right? Like there was not a lot that you could really attack. I think that there was an attack on Walls and like him lying.
What's the attack
about his
on Walls?
record. Yeah, there's a lot of attack on like he doesn't deserve X, Y, or Z, or he's lied about his whatever military record. Again, that also doesn't hold a lot of weight. Like, do people really genuinely care about that when comparing him to someone like Donald Trump or JD Vance? Like this guy,
Yeah, and his like
Walls
shin
is like a
splints.
fucking saint compared to these two people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So those critiques were not that interesting, but they were all ginnied up to go against Michelle. They were all ginnied up to go against Barack because you know why? Because they're used to it. They know how to call them elitist, charlatans like, oh, they own all of these homes and they're telling people that, they shouldn't take too much. It was like so fascinating that the substance of Kamala's speech was glossed over. Like, because it was pretty untouchable. So I will say, like, kudos to the convention team. That was red meat for conservatives, meaning in a positive way. And yeah, they went after the Obamas, they went after Walls, and they went after Joy.
The well-oiled machine, like the Obama attack machine is like a well-greased sled. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was not particularly compelling. But then segue to our next topic here. We can segue well even when we're on Zoom again. Look at us, Twig. We can still do it even when we're not in the same place. RFK Jr. Dropped out, and has endorsed our guy, not our guy, my parents' guy, Donald Trump.
National embarrassment, Donald Trump.
National embarrassment, 2 national embarrassments now. Carri Twigg, how do you feel? Did you see this coming? 2, how do you feel about RFK Jr. Endorsing your guy Don?
Oh my God. Of course, if you've been paying any attention to him whatsoever, and I've not paid a ton because he's a charlatan and just like not a serious person, it is so obvious he was going to endorse
Yeah.
Trump. And here's the thing. I have a lot of friends that were big supporters of RFK Jr. and a lot of them fell off over the course of time. But I have sort of like a hippy dippy liberal separatist,
Sure.
anti-empire, white, super rich kid crew that all are obsessed with RFK Jr. to my embarrassment. And like have been recruited multiple times. People like, just listen to one of his podcast appearances. He also did this thing that Trump is now doing, right? Like that was really what was kicking off the RFK campaign, was his willingness to go and do these 2 and 3 hour long interviews.
He was doing
in
it
the
before
podcast
Trump. Yeah.
sphere.
He laid the groundwork. He did Rogan. He did all those guys before Trump did.
Totally. And it gave him this huge bounce, which again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Like we need more of this. But I mean, it was so obvious. It was like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And he isn't taking this seriously. He does not take this seriously. Being president is a huge responsibility. The bottom line of government is literally life and death. It is the quality of life for millions and hundreds of millions of people, children, people around the world. And if you don't take it seriously, you're putting a lot of people's lives and trajectories into danger and into jeopardy. And like this guy so obviously didn't have the chops to be doing this, and was doing this for vanity and for whatever other kind of reasons he has. And so as he started to sort of, his campaign collapsed, he became wilder and wilder. It was just like, oh, you're just a joke that wants to be famous. So of course he's going to endorse Donald Trump. Like, of course. So, shocked. No, not shocked.
Not shocked.
And actually like horrified, but not shocked, but also really bored. Like I just find the whole thing so boring. These sort of like beta dudes masquerading as alphas, masquerading as like maverick outsiders. Spare me. It's so boring.
The attempt to make it a big deal too, they clearly did it to try to take away from the conclusion of the Democratic convention.
Yes.
Again, you know me, like I'm so tapped into this stuff. Like every single one of these right-wing provocateurs are heralding this as some huge moment, right? Because there needs to be some sort of life, right, injected into this dying campaign, right? Like that's what you do when you bring on a couch fucker like JD Vance. Like this is what happens to your campaign. But I mean, it will be interesting. Like, I think politically, what do you think? Does this change the polls? I mean, we know that RFK has been polling about 5% in each of these battleground states. Friends of mine who I've been texting, they're like, yeah, but that 5% isn't all going to Trump, right?
Right.
That will definitely be split because there were a lot of people who were either just not voting or voting for RFK, meaning that they didn't want to vote for Trump or Biden. So that's the reason why they're voting for RFK. So you could imagine that 5% just being the disaffected vote. And RFK going to Trump's side doesn't necessarily change that equation for them, and they're just not going to vote. But 5% is a very real number in these battleground states, though.
It's very real, but I agree. I don't think there's a 1-to-1 of the RFK voter and the Trump voter. I also don't think, and this is something that I would have a lot of sympathy for. I think we should have more than 2 viable options as president. In a country this big, it is absolutely ludicrous that we're asking people to choose between 2 people. Like it's just, we're too big, we're too diverse. We should have more options. I think that's super reasonable and fair. And when I hear people being like, I'm supporting this person because I can't with either of those 2, I'm actually quite sympathetic to that.
Sure.
And I will be shocked if there is some sort of meaningful transfer over to in actual terms of votes. I think this maybe helps his fundraising a little bit. There's like RFK had a handful of sort of Silicon Valley libertarian billionaires behind
I
him that
think that they
maybe it
were
shakes loose.
they were already on the Trump train already, though. You know what I
Exactly. It's
mean?
like
I don't think
maybe
that
it
there's
shakes loose
anyone
a
who
little bit of
saw that
IE
that's like,
spending,
oh, now I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. You know?
right? I know, I know. Um, you know,
Speak.
the dude's whole family, all his siblings came out and were like, "This is an
Yeah.
embarrassment. We're so sorry. I don't know what happened." It's like that parasite in this dude's brain really did a number on him.
I mean, the one thing that might happen, earlier point you just made, which is look, RFK Jr. really made his splash. I mean, I remember this guy pitching us anti-vax videos at Funny or Die like 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So this guy has been doing, he's been an anti-vaxxer. You know, he was an anti-vaxxer
Forever.
before anti-vaxxers were cool. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's been at this
Totally,
shit for
totally.
a very, very long time. And he comes at it from a perspective that feels and sounds very populist, which is these pharmaceutical companies don't care about you. They just care
Right,
about their
which is
profits.
true. Which
You
is
know,
true.
we have to protect our families, have to protect ourselves, ask
Yeah.
questions, don't just do what the government's telling you to do. Like this all feels like there's a strain of progressivism, there's a strain of
Yeah.
sort of anti-capitalist, late stage capitalism that's like, oh yeah, I hate pharmaceutical companies. Fuck the pharmaceutical
Yeah,
companies,
sure.
right? That I think was appealing to
Also
some,
climate.
and climate as well.
Like he's been
Yeah.
on the water rights, water protectors
Yep.
crew for a long time. He's been on
Yep.
climate stuff for a long time. Ray actually did a film. My business partner did a film with him,
Yeah.
something like years ago on water rights. It's like but he jumped the shark. Like I don't know what happened, but
Well, I was gonna say, but there's nothing, in my humble opinion, there's nothing that he can do that can convert any of that vibe or any of that goodwill to Donald Trump. It's
yeah,
just not gonna happen. You know, like
yeah,
it's just not gonna happen. I think young people are gonna see through that bullshit so quickly. And the crowd that we're sort of speaking about and thinking about, I feel like they will probably be the most disappointed by this
yeah,
because it's embarrassing. Like
yeah,
if you've been supporting RFK Jr. up until now, thinking like he was legit or thinking he was a credible human, like shame on you. But you know, come on board.
yeah.
Look, come on board, right? Like
I mean,
the water's warm.
to me he was such an egregious example of the fact that all human beings who run for office, all human beings everywhere who do all things are inherently flawed, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you're upset that the leader of the Democratic Party or the leader of the Republican Party has a bunch of stuff that you're probably fine with and probably agree with, but then has a handful of things that you don't. And so your solution is RFK Jr. Like, are you kidding
That's
me?
your guy.
Like the
Brainworms RFK Jr. That's your
what?
guy.
Like the
Yeah.
juice is really not worth the squeeze on that guy. Like for real, what are you talking about? But
It's a tough
that's his
beat,
life.
I think. I like that we sort of get that out of the way though, because it has been a distraction. I feel like the press also hasn't known how to cover him really, because he wasn't included in the debates. People were doing these exposés, like Claire Malone did this expose on him killing a bear in Central Park, and we're
That
like,
was
what are we supposed to do
so
with all this?
weird.
But now that we just know he's a part of the Trump train, it's a lot easier to just put him in the appropriate wannabe fascist box, like
Yeah.
that's where he belongs. And we just will not bring him up from here on out. Going to the polls
Right.
though, quickly, there's not much change, guys, honestly. Again, I mean, we just spoke to you guys like a few days ago. We're churning it out a lot more often here. We're going to try to churn it out a lot more as we're getting closer to election day.
Turns out too many things
overall,
happened to do this weekly.
yeah, overall, not much change, really, honestly, truly.
Yeah.
All the states that we had spoken about before that Trump was leading in, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, he still leads in. Pennsylvania, he's still leading in. All the states where Kamala was leading in, she's still leading in. States like Michigan, states like Wisconsin. And yeah, so
So the
it's still
big
a toss
question
up.
is really, I mean, the next big, so we're going to get a round of polling, I think maybe in like a week, that'll let us know if she
Yeah.
gets a bounce from the convention. Maybe it'll start coming out as early as the beginning of this week, but probably by
What do
week's
you
end, it will
think?
have
Let's
settled.
bet. We our last bet did not go well because either of us was wrong about our VP choice. How big
And we
do
didn't
you
have any
think?
stakes.
How big do you think her bounce will be? I wish I did some I was curious. I wanted to go back and look to see what the bounces were for Obama, but I feel like there's always at least like 2 to 3 points, right? Nationally.
Yeah.
How big do
Yeah.
you think it
Nationally,
will?
as we've discussed, national polls don't matter too much, but I think you're going to see a big bounce in Pennsylvania. I think you're going
Yeah,
to see a bounce in maybe North Carolina, Georgia,
a
Arizona.
state that Trump is leading in, but a state that the fact that Roy Cooper was the introductory speech to Kamala Harris. Speaking of like showing all your cards on the table.
Yeah.
And then also Governor Cooper also then the part in his speech where he starts naming all the states, but then he only named battleground states. So Cooper's like, North Carolina, stand up. Arizona, stand up. Michigan, stand up. And I'm like, bro, just name one state that's not a battleground
Americans.
state.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. Like poor Hawaii, you know what I mean?
Poor Hawaii, yeah.
Oklahoma.
Idaho, Oklahoma. But
Oklahoma got no
no, North
love.
Carolina, Twig, that's a very good call. North Carolina. I definitely see that being a bump for sure.
I think they get a bump there for multiple reasons. I think that demographically there's going to be a lot of help there, but it's also a big military state. Like there's
Yes.
a lot happening in North Carolina that I think
True.
will have gotten some appeal. You have a lot of young people who have moved there, entrepreneurs. Like I think messaging really hit for North Carolina
Great call.
in an interesting way. So I'll keep an eye out for that. Like, I think that's going to be we obviously know there's the blue wall, right? But I think the big question is the Wisconsin, the Michigan, the Pennsylvania. But I think the question for her is, can she expand the map? And like, what would it mean for her to have a mandate to get 300 electoral votes, right? To like bring in the North Carolina, like if she got North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and the blue wall, like amazing.
Which by the way, all possible. Like
All
that's
absolutely possible.
all
Like,
in play.
yeah.
All in
So
play. And
huge
Arizona,
deal.
speaking of convention programming, Arizona, like with Mark and Gabby, that final night, huge night for Arizona as well. So
Huge night for Arizona.
I could see Arizona. I can see Arizona popping off as well. How is your boy JD doing? Should we do a little JD watch? I'm not sure if you've been following. He had a very weird run-in at like, did you see this? He went to like a donut shop.
I mean, like, when was the last time you were in a store, bro? Like, when's the last, like, who do you talk to? What is happening? Why was that so terrible?
Why is it
Even,
so hard to have a conversation with someone? You know what I mean?
even as someone who is rooting for your failure,
Yeah.
why? Like, I felt so bad for for that poor woman.
The poor woman, I know, she's like, I don't want to be on camera. She's like, please, I don't want to be on camera.
Like, get out of my face. Like, the transaction is just all over you. Get out
It's
of my face.
so
How
bad.
dare you? It was
And then
so
he didn't
bad.
know how, the only question he could ask was, how long have you been working here? How long have you been working here? And then,
Like,
and then when
Huck,
and then when everyone
what a
answers that question, he's like,
loser.
how long has this donut shop been around? Like, dude, do you not know how to have a conversation with a human being? Like, what the fuck? This is so painful to
Oh,
watch.
so bad. So I'm just, posting my I've been getting some good DMs, like posting my anti JD Vance memes, which is great.
I think we got to
Staying
post a
steady.
new. I think we got to post a new carousel of memes tomorrow. I feel like Monday should be our
Right.
meme day, and I feel like every Monday should be our JD Vance meme. So we gotta get some good
There's
ones for
some killer
tomorrow.
ones in the DMs. There's some really good ones in the
Let's
DMs.
go. Keep sending those,
And
people.
And so we have the debates coming up. Like, that's going to be the real clarifier. That's everyone's next
Yes.
turn on the stage. That's, you know, it's amazing. How fun is it being in news cycles where you barely hear a peep about Donald Trump? It's so delicious. Like, this could be our world. This could be our life, people. This could be our life where you don't hear about Donald Trump every day. So,
I would
but
say
he'll
that
obviously
was
be back
the
in the
best.
news.
The best line of there's so many great lines and kind of brands that have come out of Kamala announcing and the convention. The one that I love the most is just we're not going back. We're not going back is just so like we don't want to go back to this mess. Like we're just not going back to that bullshit. And you're right. Like we don't want to go back to Trump dominating media and culture and politics and policy every single fucking day of our lives.
Moment of the
People are
day.
just tired of that shit.
Yeah.
We're just tired of it. We're not going back to that shit. So like I think let's just keep we're not going back to that bullshit. Just done. Just moving on. You know?
Moving on.
Useless.
But, you know, his next big high profile moment is going to be these debates. So
The debates are going to be really exciting. I'm excited for the debates. I think we never underestimate Donald Trump in debates. He's just a bully. He's just kind of good at speaking loudly.
Yeah.
Because
no, he does. He has
matter.
like a weird witchy quality to him. Like he really like he might be a witch. Like
he doesn't. The rules just don't apply to him. So he doesn't preoccupy himself with things like facts, you know?
No.
And like figures, like reality. He's just gonna make shit up. And I do think Kamala's gonna be great at just like knocking it down. I hope.
And then it's the Walls debate. I have inquired into tickets for the Walls debate. It's in New York City on October 1st.
Let's go.
We might have to get credentialed as press because I don't know that there's an audience.
Oh, there's no audience. I would still love to be there. I mean, we can also throw something in New York on the same day. If you know what I mean? Like if we don't get the credentials, we can do something fun. But I can't wait. Carri, Twigg, I do have to jump. I'm gonna let you have the final word here though. We survived the DNC. There's 74 days, 73 days.
Like that. 73 days.
73 days left. Twigg and Jenkins is still chugging along. I want to thank, there's so many people who've been so supportive, like friends like Jose and others. They just love our very fired up rants.
We have more special guests coming.
Yeah.
Big episode filming in DC in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And then Oscar Jenkins. Do you want to say hi to everyone, Oscar Jenkins? Come say hi.
Hi.
Hey, bud. How you doing?
Good.
Shouldn't you be in bed? You have school tomorrow.
Yeah, we got to go to bed. No, he's saying. All right,
Marina's out of town. All hell's broken.
I know. We're going to go to bed right now. Bye, guys. Bye. Peace.